Maya stood at the edge of the weathered dock in the small coastal town of Seabrook, her fingers tracing the rough, salt-crusted wood as the morning mist clung to her skin like a damp shroud. The air was thick with the scent of brine and damp earth, a reminder of the recent storm that had left the town bruised but not broken. For years, Maya had dreamed of becoming a marine biologist, inspired by the ocean's vast mysteries, but that dream felt distant now, drowned by a sea of self-doubt. She had moved to Seabrook 6 months ago, hoping the quiet rhythm of coastal life would silence the nagging voice in her head that whispered she wasn't smart enough, brave enough, or resilient enough to make it in a competitive field. Her initial struggles were compounded by the town's own challenges. The storm had damaged local ecosystems, and as a newcomer, Maya felt like an outsider, unable to contribute meaningfully. Each day, she'd wake before dawn, her heart heavy with anxiety, and walk the shoreline, watching the waves crash with a force that mirrored her inner turmoil. She'd jot notes in her worn journal, observations of marine life that felt trivial compared to the work of established scientists, and the fear of failure coiled in her stomach like a tight knot. It was easier to retreat, to tell herself that her passion was just a foolish fantasy, than to face the possibility of rejection or inadequacy. But one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Maya stumbled upon an old fisherman mending his nets by the pier. His name was Elias, and his weathered face bore the lines of a life spent battling the sea. He noticed her lingering and offered a kind smile, inviting her to share a cup of tea in his modest shack. Over steaming mugs, he spoke of his own losses, how storms had swept away his boat years ago, leaving him with nothing but the determination to rebuild. The ocean, he said, his voice raspy with wisdom, it doesn't care if you're scared. It just keeps moving. And so must we. His words struck a chord deep within Maya, igniting a spark of resilience she hadn't known she possessed. She began to see her fear not as a barrier, but as a natural part of the journey. Instead of avoiding the damaged tidal pools left by the storm, she started volunteering with a local conservation group, her hands trembling at first as she helped clear debris and monitor water quality. The work was messy and exhausting, and there were days when self-doubt threatened to overwhelm her, like when she misidentified a species of seaweed and felt the sting of embarrassment. But she learned to breathe through those moments, to remind herself that mistakes were lessons in disguise. She started small, focusing on one task at a time, and gradually, the act of doing became a form of therapy. She'd spend hours observing the gradual return of life to the battered shores, noting how anemones clung to rocks with tenacity, and how crabs settled back into their burrows with unwavering purpose. These small victories, though seemingly insignificant, built her confidence brick by brick. She began to share her findings with the community, her voice shaky at first in town meetings, but growing steadier with each presentation. People started to listen, to see her not as an outsider, but as someone who cared deeply about their home. The turning point came during a particularly rough week when another squall threatened to undo their progress. Maya, now leading a small team of volunteers, felt the old fears resurface. What if they failed? What if the ecosystem couldn't recover? But instead of retreating, she drew on the coping mechanisms she'd developed. She leaned on her team for support, practiced mindfulness to calm her racing thoughts, and remembered Elias's advice to keep moving. They worked tirelessly, reinforcing barriers and rescuing stranded marine life, and in the quiet moments between tasks, Maya realized that her fear had transformed into a fierce protectiveness. She wasn't just overcoming self-doubt, she was discovering a strength born from empathy and connection. When the storm passed, leaving the town unscathed thanks to their efforts, Maya stood on the shore, her clothes soaked and her heart full. The sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the ocean, and in that moment, she felt an overwhelming sense of empowerment. She had faced her deepest fears and not only survived but thrived, her passion for marine biology now fueled by a hard-won wisdom. She understood that resilience isn't about never falling, but about learning how to rise each time, and that true strength comes from embracing vulnerability. The experience taught her that the human spirit, like the tides, has an innate ability to turn, to adapt, and to heal. Months later, Maya's research on Seabrook's recovery became the foundation for a community-led conservation program, inspiring others to take action. She often returns to that dock, not with trepidation, but with a quiet confidence, knowing that every challenge she faced had sculpted her into someone capable of making a difference. Her story is a testament to the power of perseverance, a reminder that even in the face of doubt and adversity, we can find the courage to pursue our dreams and, in doing so, discover the depth of our own inner strength. Let this be an encouragement to anyone feeling overwhelmed by their own storms. You are more resilient than you know, and every step forward, no matter how small, is a victory worth celebrating. Break time equals 5s, greater than the rain fell in steady, cold sheets against Maya's small apartment window, mirroring the storm brewing inside her. Just 2 days ago, she had been Maya Reynolds, a rising star in the marketing department of a sleek Boston firm, her days filled with strategy meetings and the satisfying click of keyboard keys. Now, the silence in her studio apartment was deafening, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sob she couldn't suppress. The layoff had been swift, impersonal, a brief video call and a severance package that felt more like a dismissal of her worth than a consolation. At 28, she had defined herself by her career, climbing the corporate ladder with a fierce determination that left little room for anything else. The initial shock had given way to a deep, gnawing fear. What was she without that title, without the validation of promotions and paychecks? Her savings would last a few months, but the emotional savings, the confidence, the sense of purpose, felt bankrupt. Nights were the hardest, filled with restless tossing and the ghost of deadlines past. She'd scroll through LinkedIn, seeing colleagues move on, and a bitter envy would mix with her self-doubt. Maybe I wasn't good enough, she'd whisper to the dark, the words hanging in the air like a condemnation. But one insomniac dawn, as the first light tinged the sky gray, she remembered a forgotten dream from her college days, hiking the Appalachian Trail. It had been a fleeting fantasy, pushed aside for practicality. Now, with her life upended, it felt less like an escape and more like a calling. She spent weeks researching, her anxiety warring with a flicker of excitement. Buying gear with her dwindling funds was terrifying, each purchase felt like a gamble on an uncertain future. Friends and family voiced concerns. "Are you sure, Maya? It's dangerous. You've never done anything like this." Their worries echoed her own insecurities, but beneath the fear, a stubborn resilience began to stir. She realized that staying put, drowning in what-ifs, was its own kind of danger. So, with a backpack that felt impossibly heavy, both physically and metaphorically, she boarded a bus to Springer Mountain, Georgia, the southern terminus of the trail. The first steps on the trail were a revelation and a trial. The lush greenery of the Appalachian forest was breathtaking, a world away from the sterile office walls she'd known. But the physical exertion was brutal. Her muscles ached, her feet blistered, and every uphill climb felt like a metaphor for her life's sudden incline. Panic attacks would seize her in the quiet moments, especially at night alone in her tent. The sounds of the wilderness, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, amplified her loneliness. She'd clutch her phone, desperate for a signal, for a connection to the world she'd left behind. But there was none. In those dark hours, she learned to breathe deeply, to focus on the rhythm of her heart, to remind herself that she had chosen this. It wasn't easy. Some days, she wanted to quit, to hitchhike back to the comfort of her old life. But she kept putting one foot in front of the other, driven by a nascent belief that there was something to be found in the struggle. As weeks turned into months, the trail began to work its magic. The challenges didn't disappear, but Maya's relationship with them changed. She met fellow hikers, kindred spirits with their own stories of loss and seeking. Sharing a campfire with an elderly man who'd lost his wife, or a young couple saving for a farm, she saw that her pain wasn't unique. It was part of the human tapestry. She learned practical coping mechanisms, breaking big goals into small, manageable steps, like reaching the next shelter or water source. Mentally, she started journaling, pouring her fears and triumphs onto paper. The act of writing became a therapy, helping her process the grief of her lost career and uncover layers of herself she'd long ignored. She discovered a love for the simplicity of sunrise, the taste of rehydrated meals earned through sweat, and the profound silence that allowed her thoughts to settle. One particularly grueling day in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, she faced a steep, rocky ascent in pouring rain. Slipping on wet stones, her hands scraped and bleeding, she felt a surge of despair. "I can't do this," she cried out to the empty trail. But then, she remembered a quote she'd read: "Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the judgment that something else is more important." In that moment, the something else was her own growth. She pushed on, step by painful step, and when she reached the summit, shrouded in mist, a wave of empowerment washed over her. It wasn't about conquering the mountain, it was about conquering the doubt within. She stood there, soaked and exhausted, but with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. The climax of her journey came in Maine, near the trail's end at Mount Katahdin. After 5 months and over 2,000 miles, her body was lean and strong, her spirit tempered by the elements. As she climbed the final boulder fields, each handhold felt symbolic of the resilience she'd built. Reaching the summit, the panoramic view of forests and lakes stretched out before her, and tears streamed down her face, not of sadness, but of profound gratitude. She realized that the trail hadn't given her a new purpose, it had stripped away the old one to reveal who she truly was, not a job title, but a person capable of endurance, adaptability, and joy in the simple things. The wisdom she gained was simple yet transformative. Life's detours aren't setbacks but opportunities to rediscover our core strengths. She had learned to embrace uncertainty, to find comfort in her own company, and to see failure not as an end but as a beginning. Descending the mountain, she felt a hopeful lightness, carrying the lessons of the trail into her future. She decided to start a small business guiding others on hiking trips, blending her marketing skills with her newfound passion. The ending wasn't about a happy ever after, but about a continuous journey of growth. Maya's story reminds us that in our darkest moments, when the path ahead seems unseen, we have an inner compass that points toward resilience. It's in the struggle that we find our strength, and in letting go of who we thought we were, we become who we are meant to be. So, if you're facing your own mountains, remember, every step forward, no matter how small, is a victory. Keep walking, and you might just find that the unseen path leads you home to yourself.